Welcome everyone to another episode of FitFam. This is Hilary, Miss Natural Olympia.
And this is Doug, the Formulator.
And today we're going to stay on a subject we've been on a little bit lately, but I think it's one that needs the most information. We get questions on what exactly do you mean when you're talking about processed foods and those types of things. We're going to kind of hit that same topic, but from a different angle.
Yeah, Doug's least favorite quote is a calorie is a calorie is a calorie.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, got me kicked out of class. It is actually the main teaching of registered dietitians. It's the main teaching in medical school. It's the main teaching that the processed food companies and everyone that really doesn't care about your health at all, just about money, wants you to believe.
Yeah, for sure. And you wanted to go into, are we going to jump right into your study?
Let's jump into it. I mean, basically, what we're talking about, just to kind of dispel that, is that's the greatest myth there is in nutrition.
Right.
And that we've taught for decades that a calorie is not a calorie, meaning it depends on where it comes from. And at first, we're always looked at as like, oh, you're just going against the norm. Like, what are you doing as a nutritionist, teaching the opposite of what your main foundational principle is? And we'd always say it's not our main foundational principle. It's the marketing companies and all that's main.
I think it's interesting too that we could even make the statement because many people know the difference between how they feel after a whole bag of chips and an apple. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or an equivalent amount of calories of chips and apple and how you feel at the end of it, which is vastly different.
It is vastly different. And the argument used to be that, well, you might feel a certain way, but a calorie is still a calorie. Like, you're not going to gain weight from the same amount of calories if you ate it from Big Macs than you did salads, right? That was the argument.
Right.
And it was completely false. Mm-hmm. And the only good thing that's come out of this whole processed food revolution that, we used to eat about 5 to 10% processed foods, and now the average is 80 to 90% of the food intake each day is processed food. But the one good thing that's come out of it is we've got data to really show that a calorie is not just a calorie. It depends on where it comes from and depends how it's utilized in the body. So there's a new disorder.
Yeah, the ultra-processed food use disorder.
So isn't that crazy? This is an actual new condition created by the American Medical Association. And, it's interesting that there's enough data to show that if you eat too many ultra-processed foods, it does create a disorder, which is absolutely true in the body. But you have to look at why the AMA likes to make conditions, like actually have a name. One, it's so they can say, hey, only medical doctors or allopathic medicine can cure it, which is completely false. Allopathic medicine's there to save our lives. They don't cure anything. And the second is that, the fact that they've got enough data to show that is really intriguing, because there really is a lot of information to show that it does create problems. But what they're wanting to do about it is mind-blowing, is that they're putting people on these SSRI drugs or depression, anti-anxiety drugs to fix the problem.
Yeah, which is laughable, considering if the problem is ultra-processed food, wouldn't the solution be natural food? wouldn't that be the obvious choice? And I think right here would be a great time to mention the difference between a processed food versus an ultra-processed food. Absolutely. Which I think sometimes you and I use them interchangeably, really. But according to what a processed food is, a processed food can be anything that is taken from its natural state and heated, frozen, diced, juiced. Any of those things create a processing of that food.
Absolutely.
Right? So
you're processing it.
Exactly.
You're moving it.
Exactly.
You're changing it.
Short of grabbing the apple from the tree and taking a bite, which would be a non-processed food, anything that you do to it at all is processing it. So what we would always, we're getting some feedback, I think, trying to fix it. What we always talk about is eating food as close to its natural state as possible. Absolutely. So an ultra-processed food are foods that have been created from like constituents of food particles to create this new food.
Or man-made chemicals.
Right, or man-made chemicals, or a food that is completely ready to eat meal that's void of actual food particles.
Well, actually full of nutrients, right? They
Nutrients.
might have
There you go.
macronutrients,
Yeah.
carbs, proteins, and fats, but no micronutrients. And I think that really is the key. And so the biggest question we get, especially now that we don't give, any talks anywhere in the nation, that we don't talk about the damage processed foods creates, is like, well, tell us the difference then between processed and raw, processed, and ultra processed. Those three, right? The natural whole foods, processed, and ultra processed. So I love that processed doesn't necessarily mean bad.
Right, exactly.
Right?
You could go to the freezer section and grab a package of vegetables that literally have been flash frozen. There's nothing added to them. It's just vegetables, but yes, it's still considered processed. That is vastly better than going to the chip section and grabbing a package of Doritos off the shelf and eating it.
100%. And so I think that the ultra processed foods is what this study and this new condition has shown to be extremely damaging the body, not so much just basic processing of taking a potato and baking it, right? Or doing things
Right.
like that. And so what are some examples of ultra processed? How do we know it's ultra processed?
Well, we know it's ultra processed when it is trying to create a longer shelf life. That's your best indicator. And so the list of ingredients goes on and on with a number of preservatives and or artificial colors, artificial flavors, anything that is not an actual food itself. So, we have a list of different things that you would look for in something that's been ultra processed.
Right. So why don't we do a little backstory, a quick backstory of some things that we've talked about, and then let's go into some of those ingredients. And
Okay.
actually, some foods. I think you have some nutritional facts from chips and
Yep.
things we'll go into.
Yep.
So the quick backstory for those of you that haven't seen some of our previous episodes comes back as to why in the world, if processed food is so bad for you, why it's out there. Why is it getting pushed? Why are these companies, these food companies, really making these foods that are so bad for you? Don't they care about our health?
Well, that's easy. I mean, they create a craving for it and then you have to buy more.
Right.
So it all revolves around money.
It does revolve around money, but that isn't how the food companies started. Food companies started because they were trying to make things that are healthy easier to obtain, right? To make it easier in our lifestyle to get. And even the original Kellogg's, right? There was an original study called the Kellogg study. That original study was actually a great study where they just took these healthy grains and found a way to try to get them into every household easily, but then it went astray. And the reason that it went astray with Kellogg's and General Mills and all these other food companies that probably started off with, we want to make money, but we want to do it right? We formulate supplements, but we're going to stick to some very strict guidelines.
Right.
Our profit margin is a heck of a lot less than the chemical-derived vitamins, but it's mission-based. So why aren't there more mission-based food companies out there? Well, the reason is that they were bought up by the tobacco companies. So in the 1980s, tobacco companies saw what was happening. That the research was showing that if you smoke, your risk of cancer is extremely high. You're basically going to get it unless you have these crazy genetics. And so they started looking where else we can be able to make money, and they were able to apply their marketing techniques to the food industry and came out and bought General Mills. They bought all these food companies. So what used to be Camel Joe now becomes a Kool-Aid Man, and you can go right down the list of what they did is just move their marketing techniques of being able to market tobacco and that to children and make it sound like it's this greatest thing for adults to even be healthy, and moved it into food and bought those food companies. So that's why ultra processed foods are being marketed to you, and they don't want to talk about them being unhealthy because the chemicals that you mentioned, the chemicals that were in tobacco to make it addictive, it wasn't the tobacco itself. I'm not a fan of tobacco, but it was the chemicals, the additives to it. Those chemicals are the same chemicals plus more, because we've learned a lot, that are in the foods that cause that addiction, that make it so that you crave more and more. It overrides something in the body called the ghrelin-leptin response, to where when you eat food, you have a response in the body that tells you, hey, that's enough to survive. That's good. But it overrides it. And that's the problem. And that's what ultra-processed foods ultimately do, is override the body's ability to understand when we should stop. And that's why you keep going.
And it's a vicious cycle.
It's a vicious cycle.
Because you feel hungry, so you eat ultra-processed food. You eat the ultra-processed food, and you feel full until your body's being overridden again and you want more of the same garbage. So that's why it's interesting when people do the 21-day challenge and eliminate a lot of the processed food. I think it's surprising to people how their cravings change and all of a sudden they do eat less because they're actually getting familiar with what it feels like to be full.
Absolutely.
And to not crave sugar. And one of the main ingredients that makes us want more is sugar or artificial sugars. So that's something to look for in your list of ingredients as you're trying to figure out the ultra processed versus processed or natural.
Right. And then just to point out that there are plenty of studies that show that highly processed foods are considered addictive substances based on the scientific criteria of what's an addictive substance, right? Like even from the cocaines and the heroines to different medical drugs and things like that, that this is completely established and in the literature that they create that same type of an addiction.
Yeah, the same like dopamine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So added sugars such as sucrose, high fructose corn syrup, dextrose, these are all things that you can look for in your ingredient list. If they're on it, then they're ultra processed. Artificial sweeteners that we absolutely hate, aspartame, your saccharin, your sucralose, those type of things. And then we get into the artificial preservatives, things like monosodium glutamate, which is just wreaks havoc on the digestive system.
And it is, MSG is basically used a lot when you go to places where they have buffets and that it's a preservative that if you sprinkle it on food, vegetables and things like that, they'll be able to stay out longer before they go bad so that people make more money because they can keep the vegetables and those things that will spoil out longer. But as you said, the monosodium glutamate, the sodium bound to this glutamate, what it does is it goes in and it actually will destroy the friendly bacteria, and especially the friendly bacteria that are the first line of being able to help nutrients get absorbed into the bloodstream. And so it can actually immediately cause reactions if you're sensitive to it. I'm one that I know if I have MSG,
Right.
It's an immediate thing to people where it is over time, but what it's doing is it's stopping nutrient flow into the body. So it's showing up over time as a major deficiency that will lead to a disease. And so you don't necessarily know which one you are unless it's immediate like me, but it causes damage no matter what. And really, really bad to take in. The same with aspartame, like you mentioned, and sucralose and those types of things, because those affect some people immediately and others it takes time, but it does affect everyone at some point.
Right. And so some examples of some ultra processed foods. Let's go through some of
Perfect.
those. Chips, sodas, candy, cereal, and then ultra processed meats even. Let's go into that. So, think of your bacons, your sausages, your lunch meats that don't look like the actual meat itself.
Right.
All of those are ultra processed foods.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you a question about those because you mentioned like chips, right? And
Right.
meats and things like that. So we're getting to a point where people are saying, look, I want chips. I'm going
Right.
to have some chips.
Right.
Just tell me the best ones.
Okay.
And people like you, I'm going to have meat,
Right.
right? So how do I distinguish between what is something that might be processed but not ultra processed in, let's start the category, let's say chips per se.
Okay, so I think number one, the best thing to ask yourself is how far removed from nature is this food? Okay, so how many steps did it take to get this food to where it is? So that's a great thing to ask yourself when you're going to eat something. If
So
it doesn't matter.
So it's easy with like red licorice, right? There's no red licorice plant,
Bingo,
right?
exactly.
But chips all come from potatoes
I mean, potato chips, there's corn chips.
or corn.
Okay.
So how can I tell which one of those?
Okay, so then we go into how many ingredients are in the processed or ultra processed food, and we'll put it up on the screen, but it's mind blowing. We pulled up ingredient list from Siete potato chips and corn chips, and we pulled it up from straight up Doritos. Is that where you went? Doritos?
What's siete? No, dos. Is it
7?
It's a number.
Yeah.
Right? Got it.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, so when the list of ingredients looks like this and it's never ending versus a list of ingredients that looks like this and it's a fourth of the size and you can pronounce the ingredients, that's how you know you're in a better ultra processed situation. Because we had this conversation.
Better processed, not ultra processed, right?
Right. I don't know. You and I disagree on this one because.
Well, I think that the public needs to understand the difference between, for us, everything's ultra processed if it goes through a certain, degree of refinement, if you would. But it's getting so bad out there that we've got to give people easy distinction between, I feel comfortable with this, and there's no way I'm going to eat this. You should never eat an ultra processed.
Well, so for example, when we're looking at these two different ingredients, the ingredients here is potatoes, avocado oil, and then it goes into the seasoning for the potatoes and the avocado oil. Oftentimes when you're looking at chips, it will tell you a vegetable oil, and then next to it in parentheses, it will tell you all the different forms of vegetable oils that are used in the vegetable oil.
Ultra processed.
So that right there is ultra processed. When you're talking about potatoes and then avocado oil, then at least right there, your first two ingredients, you're safe. You haven't delved into multiple oils and have to deal with the ultra processed. Then for the siete, it goes right into the seasonings, and every single one you can pronounce. We're talking about red chili powder, sea salt, ground dates, paprika, tomato powder, distilled white vinegar powder, and it just goes on. And those ingredients. When I look at the ingredients for the Doritos, we're talking about. In the first two lines, it says corn and then vegetable oil from sunflower, canola, and or corn oil, maltodextrin. These are, just so everybody understands, the list of ingredients is in order of most to least,
right,
on the supplement facts. So even and then we go into maltodextrin made from corn, and then less than 2% of all of the following, which monosodium glutamate is about the fifth ingredient.
Artificial colors.
And then we go into artificial colors. We've got yellow 5, we've got red 40. It just goes on and on and on. And so when you're talking about a chip, processed versus ultra processed, actually will make a massive difference in how you feel and how you think,
and how fat you get.
And
it's true, because a calorie is not a calorie,
right?
And
right.
They did the study that showed that it had the same amount of ultra processed food calories versus least processed or raw, and the people with the same amount of calories in the ultra processed gained more fat. And so it isn't a calorie is a calorie. And we like to say try to keep the ingredients less than 5 or 6. But in the case of those chips you just mentioned, it was more, but they were spices.
Yeah, when we're talking about, so in all reality, if we're talking about list of ingredients, there's 3 ingredients in this chips, because there's the potatoes, there's avocado oils, and then just the list of spices. And none of the spices have anything,
they're not chemically derived
preservative that is, right, crazy. So it's all natural preservatives. So
right. And so that leads me to the question then too all right, so you have different forms of preservatives. You have natural preservatives, right? And then you have the chemical processed preservatives. And I think that we had an explanation of the two, because I think people many times don't understand that there is a big difference between types of preservatives. Because we in the whole food formulation business will use only colors that come from foods. We'll use beet if we want more of a red color, right? We'll use more of a turmeric if we want more of a yellow color. Things like that. We'll use a spinach if we want a green, and we can use natural colorings. We also can use natural preservatives to be able to enhance the life of an herb or a whole food so that it can last within a capsule or in a powder longer versus the synthetics.
Yeah, so some examples of natural preservatives are salt, vinegar, sugar, and spices, which is actually exactly why in the list of ingredients they use vinegar powder, because it is a preservative.
Artificial preservatives.
Artificial preservatives are things such as sodium nitrite, monosodium glutamate,
the artificial food coloring. Right?
Artificial food coloring. I mean, I have an entire list that just goes on and on and on.
And the basic thing is in the list, if you listen to them, right, potassium benzoate, sodium benzoate, potassium bromate, potassium sorbate, think of those and say, is that an herb? Is that a spice? right?
Right.
Or is it a food? If it's not, then you have a good chance of it being a ultra-processed, chemically derived preservative or color. And that's really where you want to distinguish. And if you have questions on that, man, feel free to, email us, message us, and we'd be glad to share with you. Oh, yep, that's
Yeah.
processed or not. Because once you know, then you're able to look at the labels and really be able to determine the difference between processed and ultra-processed.
Right, right. And I think the point is that sometimes you have to take your brain and pull it out of diet brain culture and healthy brain culture.
Mm.
And because there's a big difference, boy. I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the macro counting world.
If it fits your
And if it
macros.
fits your macros, then you eat it. Well, that can lead to a number of disorders, both psychologically and physically. So
Well, when they first came out with If It Fits Your Macros too, there wasn't as many processed foods on the market. So they were able to if you burn 1,500 calories a day, as long as you take in less, you're going to lose weight. That's if it fits in your macros. But that's no longer true. The new research proves that completely false. We want to know our macronutrients, but we want to be able to take those nutrients in the regular, raw, or just simple process, right? The cooking, the freezing type process. And then it will work, right? But we've had many people, well, I was on this many calories and I didn't lose weight, but yet, my metabolism showed this is how many I should be on. But the ultra processing eliminates that and really screws things up. And so that's why ultra processed food intake leads to obesity, even though it might be a lower amount of calories. And that's a huge factor. So I think if anything today is trying to really drive that home and understand that your cravings, you can greatly slow down your cravings and have them be just for healthier foods by not eating ultra processed foods. You're not going to gain as much weight. You won't have as much disease. So ultra processed foods should be eliminated from the diet.
yeah, and what you had said, you gain more fat by eating the same calories, but by an ultra processed food versus a natural food.
Absolutely. And it's funny because you're like, well, which foods really create those extra cravings and that? Let's get Oreos out right now, and how many of you are going to eat one? Like, we both could eat a couple Oreos, and I guarantee we're going to be ravenous to eat a lot more of them, right? No matter what, it's like that craving will be there. Well, hopefully we'll stop because we know better, but that craving will be there. But if we had a bunch of apples out right now, me and Hilary are going to eat an apple or two, and we're going to be good. And why? It's because those chemicals aren't there that override the body's ghrelin leptin responses in the body. So if it's something to where you crave more and more and more of it, there's a good chance that it's something that's processed. Very seldom, I'll do that with great watermelons or peaches once in a while. I want more of because it's so hard to get great tasting ones of those. But, for the most part, what we're talking about. And I love this thing that came out in the Journal of the American Medical Association that said that, basically, I should ask this question, y'all. How many of you have children or grandchildren between the ages of 2 to 19? And the study was really amazing.
Yeah, so the chance of these children having learning issues, anxiety, depression, high body fat struggles, and disease are 600 times higher than your parents.
That's nuts.
600.
Because of ultra-processed foods. So if you have that higher chance of getting disease in your children, your grandchildren, and the cravings, it's going to be tougher for them to stay away from these processed foods, especially if the number one factor is involved, and that is the people they look up to are eating them.
Yeah, and what's interesting is at this last conference that we had spoken at in Miami, one of the doctors came up to you afterward and was like, "Oh my gosh, a light bulb has gone off for me," and he was an older gentleman, but he would say to his family, "I grew up eating, what was it, McDonald's or one of the fast food restaurants, right? I grew up eating that. And so I would say I would tell my family, I'm healthy and it's not that big a deal for these kids." Well, the difference is that the fast food industry was much different 30 years ago than it is today. Yes. And the amount of preservatives that are used.
To give a quick example, McDonald's fries used to be potatoes, salt, and fried, not greatest thing in the world, but fried in tallow. Right?
Yeah.
That was it. 3 ingredients.
Those were the 3 ingredients.
Right? Now, there's over 68 ingredients and they're the ingredients that override your body's cravings.
So no longer can we say, no, I grew up on it and I'm healthy and I turned out fine, because it's different. Although the establishment has the same marketing and the same big M, what they're adding to their foods is much different.
And I think that's probably the biggest point, that if you take anything away from today, is what Hilary just said, is it's not the same. And if you're from 30 to 60 years of age, what you were raised on at those fast food restaurants, that food is different. It's more addicting. It's more damaging. You can't go back and say, I did it, so it's still okay for you to do once in a while. It's not. It's an extremely different ball game, and we really need to avoid it like the plague.
And and the thing that's a little bit scary right now is that we're even seeing it in things that we think are healthier. We go to a fast food restaurant such as Chick-fil-A and we think, oh, we're doing a much better job. Well, not too long ago, what did they list on their website? The ingredients in their grilled chicken?
Yeah, in the grilled chicken, which was interesting because they had committed to have antibiotic-free, right, organic chicken, and then they went back on it, probably because the investors saw that there was much more money, or they're funded, to whatever the reason was, and they backtracked that. And you're seeing that with some of these great chains, which we love, Chick-fil-A,
Yeah.
and a lot of them, and they're one of the best systems of getting people in and out in the world. But that's the problem, is that now, even when we're eating healthier, which that's obviously healthier than the deep fried chickens, but even though, so the bottom line is you need to find access to foods that are completely non-processed and start doing a lot of this yourself. And so we'll put a link in here to one of our new favorites called the Butcher Box, to where you could order monthly meats, and they're completely organic, grass-fed. We've searched them out in detail. The owners are a client of ours. We've flown to Boston and met with him, and we're a big proponent of that. And we'll put the link in there for you to be able to just once a month get the organic antibiotic food. So when you're home, you're doing it right. And that way, when you go out, you're getting a little bit of the processed food. You still make the best choices you can. We try to find true food kitchens and places that have the more organics. But in your home, there's no reason why you shouldn't be 100. No reason you shouldn't. And I think that's really the key.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking at ingredients and taking the foods that are the fewer ingredients. But if there is a list of ingredients, can you pronounce them, and are they derived from herbs, spices, foods, that kind of thing?
Absolutely.
And then apply that to what you choose to eat.
I think in closing for me, I want to mention that, I've been researching for decades the healthiest people in the world. And I found a book, we were going through things the other day, and it's over 1,000 pages. It's on a group called the Hunzas. And the Hunzas are a group of people that lived well over 100 years of age with no disease, and the lifestyle they lived as far as the foods they ate. And then we today even look at centenarians, and I was watching videos getting ready for this today of even some centenarians, like right now, people live over 100 years of age with good health, and what they eat and drink. And with few exceptions, there's a few exceptions, right, of genetic freaks, but with few exceptions, we're talking, I'd say easily 95% of those that live to be over 100, they all eat the same thing the Hunzas did, the same thing the top athletes that have been able to perform for a long period of time do, the Tom Brady's, people like that went way past, what normally would think was their prime. And that is that their base is always fresh fruits, vegetables, berries, least processed foods, eat a lot out of their own home or take foods with them. And that's really the key.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when we're talking about natural foods, people are like, well, give me a list other than like fruits, vegetables, berries, and that goes into your grains that are least processed grains,
What's a good one that you like to use?
I like to use kamut, but also organic oats, and then your rices, your legumes, your nuts, and all of those items that are as close to their natural state as possible. So when we're talking about nuts, we're talking about raw nuts.
Yeah, absolutely. And we always get these comments after talks like this. Well, wait a second, time out. What about these diets and people out there right now that are saying oatmeal's bad for you, right? One of the latest Asprey's, the biohacker guys coming out, oh, it's bad, it's peasant food. And you have people come out and say, oh, vegetables kills the lectins, you shouldn't eat it. Or no, you should be on this super high protein diet like Atkins or keto or things like that. Look, here's the bottom line with this, and I'll say it a million times, but it's so important, is that standard American diet, the processed food diet in America, is so bad that these fad diets like intermittent fasting, like keto, like paleo, like carnivore are better, and so people get results. But they're not the things to do to reach optimal health and vitality and longevity and athleticism. They are not. They're stepping stones. So I know people get all upset. Well, this is what I did to lose the weight to get started.
Well,
Yes.
I used the weight, or I cured this or that. And it's like, well, yeah, because you eliminated certain things that were causing a big issue. But now let's talk about what's best and how to be as healthy as possible.
Absolutely. And really, it all comes around. And when you've been in the industry as long as we have, it'll come around. And for example, I remember when I used to go against Dr. Atkins, and we were talking and talking about it, and everyone's all protein, because it was sexy, and it was like, oh yeah, you can eliminate carbs and all of this stuff. Well, no one will talk about that. At the end of Dr. Atkins' life, he wrote a book. His last book was called Atkins for Life, where he said, you know what? I probably was wrong saying this is the lifestyle you should live the rest of your life. I think it's a good way to start, but you need to add back in healthy vegetables and healthy grains and those types of things. Go read the book. And so basically he backtracked at the end, knowing that for true longevity, you need a balanced diet of macronutrients, carbs, proteins, fats. You don't just get rid of one of them. The same thing with keto, right? One of the big doctors nowadays, Dr. Pita Attia, he was a big keto guy, the keto doctor and all that. And now he's come out and said, well, you know what, there's really no bearing in science. But yet people followed him as a medical doctor because it was supposed to be science-based, and he quit doing it because it's truly not the best thing to do long term. All of these things in our world and training doctors, we'll have them do things for a while as we use diet as an intervention in the body to help people with epilepsy, different things like that, right? Mm-hmm. It's a treatment. But for longevity and optimal health and optimal athleticism, you want to follow a diet that has balanced carbs, proteins, and fats, but just get rid of the processed version of those. That way, you're going to reach optimal health, right?
I love it. Couldn't have said it better.
And, probably one of the great examples in your world is the bodybuilding diets. It's pretty basic.
Yeah, I mean, right now, especially, we're going into hardcore prep season, and Doug always likes to say the healthiest are the bodybuilders in prep. And the reason he says that is because if you're a true bodybuilder in prep, then almost every single processed food, other than maybe a protein powder, is kicked from the diet. At every meal, we're either eating some type of meat, a lean meat, and some type of healthy carbohydrate. So oats, rices, potatoes, anything like that, and then vegetables throughout the entire day, and maybe some berries. And that is the diet of a bodybuilder. We are not eating chips. We're not eating crackers. We're not eating
candies,
condiments, sodas. So yeah, for sure.
So the key is look, money is the big driving factor out there, and there's not that many companies left, but there are some that will make the foods based on what's best for you, and that there are 3, 4, 5 ingredient foods, and you can find them. It just takes a little bit of work, but once you found them, then you got it, right? And then you're there. And so you want to look for those companies that are mission-based, usually family-owned, and then you'll know that, hey, these people truly care about providing a good product. They want to make a living, but they're providing a product that helps you reach optimal health. And it takes a little more search nowadays, and we'll keep giving you brands that we find and things to be able to help you on this journey. But the key is cut out processed foods. Now you know from Hilary what is a processed versus an ultra-processed food, and being able to, really start working toward even the least amount of processed food, but at least 0 ultra-processed foods to help you on your journey to optimal health.
That's it.
Until next time, this is Miss Natural Olympia Hilary.
And this is Doug the Formulator.
Keep chewing.
See you next time.